What if I told you Canada didn't threaten the United States? They miscalculated. And now President Donald J. Trump is holding all the leverage because this story is not about trash talk. It's about math. It's about borders and it's about consequences. Now, here's what just happened. Canada, under Prime Minister Mark Carney, chose to deepen ties with China publicly, deliberately, using the words New World Order.
I believe the progress that we have made in the partnership sets us up well for the New World Order. It's a partnership with new focus and greater depth and a sense of purpose, and I look forward to realizing its promise and building on it in the years to come. A partnership that leverages our strengths to create greater stability, security, sustainability, and prosperity for all our peoples. And I look forward to this working session to advance those objectives. Thank you very much.
Not in a private meeting, not buried in paperwork, out loud, on the world stage. So while President Xi Jinping smiled for the cameras, all of this was going on. And of course, if you're sitting there thinking to yourself, Ron, why in the world should I care? Well, I'll tell you right now, you should, because this is not some abstract foreign policy debate. This is about your border, your supply chains, your national leverage, and whether America keeps control of its own hemisphere. And they thought the EV deal was smart. They thought opening the door to China manufacturing would be painless. They thought the United States would grumble and just go ahead and move on.
This was not thought out properly. It wasn't consulted. It was a knee-jerk reaction as far as I'm concerned. And this is going to be a big problem.
But this is where people who don't understand Donald Trump get everything wrong here. He didn't blink, he didn't rage, he didn't threaten. Because when Trump goes quiet, it's usually because he's already doing the math.
Mr. President, Prime Minister Carney is in China. Prime Minister Carney is in China. How do you see the deals Canada and China have just signed, trade deals between the two partners?
Well, that's okay. That's what he should be doing. I mean, it's a good thing for him to sign a trade deal. If you can get a deal with China, you should do that.
And once you see the math, EVs, Ontario, Greenland, China, and the northern border, you'll understand why Canada didn't beg to become the 51st state. But they may have just put it on the table.
Less than a year ago, Mark Carney said that the biggest threat to Canadian security was China.
Minister, less than a year ago, you said that China was the biggest security threat to Canada. Do you still believe that?
And today, we have him trying to do business with them, and frankly, without delivering any auto sector jobs. So it's concerning.
Be sure to drop a like for the video and subscribe. Okay, folks, let's go and be very clear about what actually happened here, okay? This was not a courtesy visit. This was not a routine trade delegation. When Mark Carney stood in Beijing and talked about Canada and China positioning themselves for a new world order, that was strategic language, not diplomatic filter.
Brian Platt with Bloomberg News. Yesterday when you met with Premier Lee, one of the things you said in the public remarks was this partnership Canada and China, this new partnership, sets us up well for the new world order. What did you mean by that? What is the new world order?
Well, it's a great question, Brian, because I think the world is still determining what that order is going to be. And let's be clear what we're talking about first and foremost, which is what is going to govern global trade? What is the role of the WTO going to be? How important are bilateral deals such as the one we're developing, plurilateral deals, if I can use that term, Trans-Pacific Partnership, potential linkages between Trans-Pacific Partnership and the EU? Where is financial regulation, payment system regulation going to fit into that? All of these aspects, I mean, use fancy words like the architecture, the multilateral system that has been developing these is being eroded, to use a polite term, undercut, use another term. So the question is, what gets built in that place?
In politics, words are signals, and this signal was sent deliberately. Canada didn't just talk about canola tariffs or market access. They framed their partnership with China as something larger, structural, long-term, and systemic. Now that's alignment right there. And alignment is exactly what Washington watches most closely. Trade deals come and go. Strategic posture does not. Here's the part most people ignored. When a country publicly declares where it sees the future global order heading, it is implicitly declaring where it thinks power will reside. And so by doing this next to Xi Jinping, Canada wasn't hedging. It was choosing a side rhetorically, even if it insists otherwise. That's why this crossed the line from economics into strategy, and that is why it landed on President Donald J. Trump's radar immediately. So the phrase New World Order isn't controversial by accident. It carries weight because it challenges the system that emerged after World War II, a system that built largely by the United States around trade access, financial stability, and collective security.
Mine is the first visit of a Canadian Prime Minister to China in nearly a decade. The world has changed much since that last visit. And I believe the progress that we have made in the partnership sets us up well for the new world order.
Now, that system is exactly why America tolerated imbalanced trade for decades. This is the price of leadership. Institutions like the World Trade Organizations, they were designed to lock in on that order. But over time, those structures weakened. Bilateral deals replaced multilateral trust, enforcement eroded, even adversarial states learned how to game the rules while benefiting from Americans' openness. And this is why President Donald J. Trump treats that phrase as a red alert signal. His doctrine is simple. If the existing order disadvantages the United States, then the order itself is negotiable. So when Canada uses language that suggests rewriting the architecture of global trade and power, especially right alongside with China, it doesn't sound academic in Washington. It sounds like a challenge. And challenges under Trump are not debated quietly. They're calculated against leverage, timing, and response options. So this right here, this is where the headlines focused. Electric vehicles. But EVs were not the motive. They were the mechanism. Chinese EVs are not just competitive. They are state-subsidized instruments designed to penetrate markets, compress margins, and displace domestic producers. That is why the United States warned Canada explicitly, not quietly, not indirectly, explicitly. When Canada lowered barriers and signaled openness to Chinese EVs, it wasn't just inviting cheaper cars into their country. It was importing an industrial strategy backed by Beijing's balance sheet. Tariffs in this particular context here aren't about consumer prices. They're about industrial survival. The U.S. learned this the hard way. This is why President Donald J. Trump treated EV policy as national security policy, okay? So here's the part most people miss. Once Chinese EVs establish scale in a neighboring market, supply chains follow. Components, software, data flows, borders blur. This is why Washington saw this not as a trade tweak, but as a border-adjacent vulnerability forming in real time. And this exact pattern plays out in people's personal lives too. Most retirees just assume that their Medicare is fine. They don't change anything. They don't question it until they notice something. They hear that neighbors are quietly reviewing their Medicare plans. Friends are double-checking coverage before the year gets away from them. Couples are sitting down and asking, wait a second, are we sure this still makes sense for us? And this is what's happening right now. Not panic, not fear, just people realizing that waiting too long is how you end up overpaying and being the last one to find out. Now, most people don't want these surprises. Most people don't want to be the only ones who never checked. This is why so many people are already calling the phone number at the bottom of your screen right now, 909-563-8279, or they're clicking the link down below in the description to go to askchapter.org/Ron right now just to review what they already have before another year slips by. By the way, totally free service for the Ron Yates community. So Canada isn't speaking with one voice here, okay? And this really matters, okay? The loudest pushback did not come from Washington first. It actually came from Ontario. And that reaction told the real story. Ontario's auto sector lives and dies by access to the U.S. market. Its supply chains are deeply integrated south of the border. So basically, any policy that risks retaliation isn't theoretical, it's existential. Ontario's leadership called the EV opening unconsulted and reckless.
This was not thought out properly. It wasn't consulted. It was a knee-jerk reaction as far as I'm concerned. And this is going to be a big, big problem. It's going to be terrible for not only just all the people of Ontario, but especially the auto manufacturers, the supply chain. We're letting China into a market that's going to have lower tariffs than our largest market, the U.S., and I don't think that's going to go over too well with President Trump, but it's going to hurt every single auto manufacturer, every single supply chain that has anything to do with the auto sector.
Now, this is not intra-party noise. This is an economic alarm. When a province that anchors manufacturing warns that a federal decision could collapse its supply chain, Washington listens to that because fragmentation signals weakness, and weakness invites pressure.
Very concerned, and so are my friends in Michigan concerned. When you have China coming in at a low cost of EVs is concerning. We you know, as everyone knows, those parts go back and forth between Ontario and Michigan 7-8 times and get assembled in Michigan or get assembled here in Ontario. And when you have the Chinese government wanting to dump cheap Chinese parts and cheap vehicles here, it cost the Canadian and American jobs. So I'm absolutely 100% dead against this.
This is where Canada's gamble becomes visible. By courting China federally while risking backlash provincially, Ottawa exposed a fault line. And in geopolitics, fault lines get tested, especially when the neighboring superpower is led by a president who understands leverage and timing better than most. Here's where the lens changes under President Donald J. Trump. After 2024, borders stopped being lines on a map and it started being strategic assets. The doctrine is simple. It's straightforward. If adversarial influence creeps in the Western Hemisphere, it gets blocked early, quietly, and decisively. Now, that applies to ports, pipelines, data centers, and yes, neighboring countries.
Well, anyone who buys these cars, they won't be allowed to go to the U.S. Cybersecurity. I call it the spy car that they're bringing in, and they won't be allowed to get over there. And it's going to tick off the Americans that 80% of our autos are going down there. I believe that speaking to the auto sector, speaking to the supply chain as well, they were coming up with a collaborative agreement, but now throw China in here for what? They aren't going to manufacture here. So it's just a terrible, terrible, miscalculated decision by the Prime Minister. This is a Chinese government that doesn't respect labor laws, that doesn't respect making cars environmentally friendly, with they basically making it with coal. They're heavily subsidized, totally against all the auto workers here in Ontario and across the country. This is not a good situation for the auto sector as a whole.
Canada used to be treated as a given, a trusted extension of the U.S. economic and security perimeter. But that assumption only holds if alignment holds. And so once Ottawa signals openness to China-backed industrial strategies, the northern border isn't quiet anymore, it's relevant.
The security landscape continues to change. And in a world that's more dangerous and divided, we face many threats. That's the reality. And the job, my responsibilities as Prime Minister, the job of the government, is to manage those threats. You manage those threats by building resilience, building security. You manage those threats through alliances. You manage those threats through engagement. And we're pursuing all of those. And I would say that, the threat environment has increased. The risks have multiplied. So too has our resilience and our engagement, which is protecting Canadians on balance.
But does that threat from
Next
China still
question?
exist?
I'll refer to my previous answer.
This is where people underestimate Trump. He doesn't need theatrics, he recalculates posture. Trade terms, defense priorities, intelligence sharing, these are dials, not switches. Canada isn't just another ally when infrastructure, manufacturing, and data flows sit one bridge away from the United States mainland. Borders, in this doctrine, are leverage. Now, if you want to understand why this isn't really about Canada first, look north, way north, all the way north to Greenland. Greenland matters because it sits at the intersection of Arctic access, rare earth minerals, and emerging shipping lanes. And it really matters because Washington openly acknowledged European Union weakness in securing it. So that admission changes the rules. If allies cannot secure strategic terrain, the US will. Not to punish, but to prevent adversaries from filling the gap. China understands this. This is why Arctic access and mineral supply chains, they're a part of Beijing's long game. So Greenland sets precedent. It signals that geography, resources, and even security override sentimentality. So when Canada flirts with China-backed systems, the comparison is inevitable. This is not annexation talk. This is containment logic. Greenland shows exactly how Trump thinks. Secure the perimeter first, negotiate later. Canada didn't cause that thinking, but it just ran into it. Now, a lot of people read silence as weakness. That is a mistake, especially with Donald J. Trump. When Trump doesn't respond publicly, it's usually because the decision tree is already built. Public outrage locks you into positions. Quiet recalibration keeps options open. Trump wrote Art of the Deal. Trump understands timing. With domestic priorities, alliance negotiations, and electoral cycles in play, telegraphing intent would be strategically sloppy. It would be a mistake. So, instead of threatening Canada over its China outreach, he basically treated it as normal trade.
Mr. President, Prime Minister Carney is in China. Prime Minister Carney is in China. How do you see the deals Canada and China have just signed, trade deals between the two partners?
Well, that's okay. That's what he should be doing. I mean, it's a good thing for him to sign a trade deal. If you can get a deal with China, you should do that.
Now, this wasn't approval, it was containment of the moment. Now, behind the scenes, leverage doesn't require speeches. It just requires math, market access, defense posture, intelligence sharing, procurement rules. Those levers work best when the other side doesn't know which one you pull or when you pull it. And so this is exactly why Trump's calm matters. It tells allies and competitors the exact same thing. The United States doesn't need to panic to win negotiations. Silence is policy when leverage favors you.
Chairman Zhao Leji, for receiving me, my ministers, and our delegation. This is indeed a very important meeting and the most auspicious start to the new year and to a new era of relations between Canada and China. We're heartened by the leadership of President Xi Jinping and the speed with which our relationship has progressed in recent months. This sets the stage for these important discussions on a wide range of issues where we can be strategic partners, from energy to agriculture, to people ties, to multilateralism, to issues on security. And we believe that the spirit and the substance of these discussions and these agreements will provide great benefit to each of our peoples, but also provide an example to the world of cooperation amidst a time globally of division and disorder.
History is unkind to countries that try to hedge between rival powers. During the Cold War, neutrality worked only when geography insulated. Canada does not have that luxury. Its economy, defense, and even infrastructure are deeply integrated with the United States.
Didn't have any consultation, didn't consult with any of the automakers. This is going to be terrible for not only just all the people of Ontario, but especially the auto manufacturers, the supply chain. We're letting China into a market that's going to have lower tariffs than our largest market, the U.S., and I don't think that's going to go over too well with President Trump, but it's going to hurt every single auto manufacturer, every single supply chain that has anything to do with the auto sector. This was not thought out properly. It wasn't consulted. It was a knee-jerk reaction as far as I'm concerned, and this is going to be a big problem.
Playing both sides sounds flexible until pressure arrives. Now, Canada's outreach to China wasn't framed as diversification. It was framed as partnership. That distinction matters. Trade dependence is not symmetrical. China can walk away from Canadian markets more easily than Canada can walk away from the US market, and that math is not even close. Security alignment follows economics. Data, manufacturing, and logistics chains, they all pull defense commitments with them. And this is why great power competition collapses ambiguity quickly. Once lines are drawn, fence sitters, they get squeezed first. Now, Canada did not betray the United States, but it did misread the environment. And history shows that when pressure rises, countries positioned between blocks, they're forced to choose. Playing both sides delays the decision, but it never avoids it. This isn't just policy for a lot of Americans. This is personal. For decades, the United States ran persistent trade deficits with Canada, justified as the cost of friendship and stability. Now, that bargain worked as long as reciprocity felt real, but once it didn't, resentment filled the gap. Now, President Donald J. Trump, he tapped directly into that frustration. The message was simple. Fairness matters more than sentiment. When voters hear that Canada sells more into the United States than it buys back, and then they see Ottawa courting China, kind of feels like a double standard. Friendly deficits only make sense if the relationship is aligned. And so this is why the reaction wasn't academic. It landed in towns that were tied to manufacturing, logistics, and energy. People who were told for years that trade imbalances were harmless, they're now seeing leverage slipping away. That emotional shift is exactly what just turned a foreign policy story into a domestic political one. And it's also why President Trump's response resonated immediately. So the 51st state language isn't a literal policy, it's more of a leverage framing. And it works because the integration is already there. Economically, parts of Canada, they're already intertwined with the US more than some American states are with each other. Supply chains, energy grids, defense coordination, they already function as one system. And this is why the phrase lands. It highlights dependency without issuing a threat. It reframes the relationship from partnership to liability if alignment breaks. President Donald J. Trump understands narrative power. Calling attention to integration forces a question Canada would rather avoid. How much autonomy exists if access to U.S. markets and protection is essential? Well, the rhetoric isn't about annexation. It's about reminding everyone where gravity sits. When a neighbor relies on your market, your security umbrella, and even your infrastructure, the balance of power is pretty clear. The phrase sticks because it exposes that reality sharply and uncomfortably. So if Canada chooses to double down, the response, it won't be loud or theatrical. It's going to be procedural, quiet, relentless. This is where people misunderstand how leverage actually works. The first move isn't sanctions, it's recalibration. Trade terms get reweighted. Procurement rules shift. Defense priorities get reviewed. None of this requires a press conference. Market access is the pressure point. Standards, certifications, and compliance timelines, they can tighten without a headline. Infrastructure cooperation can slow down. Intelligence sharing can be narrowed. Not cut, but narrowed. Each step is defensible on paper, but cumulative in effect. So this is why courting China is riskier than it looks. Beijing doesn't replace U.S. access, it complicates it. And once complexity rises, businesses pull back before governments do. Capital hates uncertainty. So if Canada keeps signaling alignment instead of balance, consequences arrive quietly. No invasion talk, no wars, no World War III, no ground standing, just a steady realization that proximity to the U.S. market is a privilege and not an entitlement. So this is where the story ends, not with outrage, but with arithmetic. Canada didn't beg. It miscalculated. It assumed diversification without consequence. It assumed the United States would just absorb another imbalance for the sake of stability. That assumption no longer holds. President Donald J. Trump didn't blink because blinking would imply uncertainty. The leverage already shifted the moment Canada framed China as a strategic partner. President Trump doesn't respond to symbolism with symbolism. He responds with math. China is not the prize in this equation. It's the variable. The U.S. market is the constant. When those two collide, the outcome is predictable. Silence isn't indifference, it's confidence. And that's why the 51st state language went viral, not because it's policy, but because it captures the imbalance people can feel instinctively. Canada just stepped a little bit closer to China, thinking it gained room to maneuver, but instead, it reminded everyone who actually holds the hammer.